Hi everyone, this is Simon Chadwick speaking. This is the first in a series of webinars we're about to do for EMLYON. I'm naively going to make the assumption that everybody can see me and hear me and see my screen. I've actually got somebody watching this back in the business school. So if there are any problems, if I can't be seen and can't be heard, they're going to email me and I'll mess around with the settings. So my apologies that this one may be a little tricky to begin with. This is the first time we've done it, so please forgive me if there are any issues. Just to say thank you everybody for being here. It's the first of 6 planned webinars. I'll say a little bit more about what else is involved in this webinar series in due course. For those of you who are trying to timetable and schedule for what goes on over the next hour and a half, let's see how we go. If this lasts half an hour, it lasts half an hour. If it lasts an hour and a half or 2 hours, then it lasts 2 hours. I noticed from the participant list that there were some people who I already know. And as you know, for the people I've already taught or already know, I do have a tendency to talk a lot. So kick your shoes off, put your feet up, get a coffee. And as I say, it might be 30 minutes long. It might be 2 hours, 30 minutes long, but let's see how we go. For those of you who potentially do need to leave, I'm going to give some readings at the start so you can go away from here and have those readings already to hand. But otherwise, this is being recorded and it will upload onto the EMLYON website. And what we'll do is everybody who's participated in the seminar, certainly everybody who's registered to take part in the seminar, you will be emailed and told where this is. So don't feel as though you need to kind of take this as your one and only chance to watch. Just to say though, with the readings, and I guess there will be some people out there who want to look at the readings straight away, just screenshot straight away, and you'll be able to capture the readings when they come. Just to give you an overview of the title, the title is somewhat misleading, I guess, because this is not necessarily a seminar about City Football Group. What it is a seminar about is 21st century sport and the way that 21st century sport has become, and it reflects some of the most powerful influences, I think, upon globalized sport at this moment. So what I'm doing is I'm actually using City Football Group as a means through which to try and highlight some of the big issues, the big trends in global sport right now. So for all of the Man United fans who've turned up, or any of others who are expecting a feast of Manchester City and being able to either praise or condemn Manchester City, that's incidental to the main plot in many ways. So do keep that in mind. Before I get into this, just want to say thank you to health professionals, to carers, to key workers during this difficult time. I don't anticipate there are going to be a huge number of key workers or carers or health professionals who are going to be looking out for this seminar, but I wanted to say that. But more importantly, I wanted to say thank you to other people too, particularly those working in academia, academic staff, students, support staff, and others who I think are also working really, really hard during this difficult period to try and make sure that students in particular continue to receive their education in the best possible way. So, I make a general statement, and to you out there, to all of you out there, just to say thanks. If you're making a positive contribution in some way, even if that involves just not going to the supermarket, then thanks, and hopefully we'll be through this sooner rather than later. The webinar series at the moment, we have planned 6 webinars. There's one today, and then there are 5 more. The one next week takes place on Wednesday. It's actually a Q&A that will take place involving 2 global sponsorship leaders, one from Coca-Cola, one from Heineken. If you've not seen that, or you want to participate in that, then if you go to Twitter and you look for the hashtag #SportAssist, you'll be able to find more details. It's next Wednesday afternoon. The #SportAssist hashtag is really important because what we, and when I talk about we, is a group of academics are trying to do, is just to ensure that we as a community, as an academic community, remain connected, particularly with our students. And that's the crucial thing, particularly with our students. I started to use this hashtag a couple of weeks ago because I was receiving lots of requests from students saying, hey, you know, I didn't get that internship, or I'm now going to have difficulty finishing my dissertation. You know, I miss talking to people in classes. What do I do? And so there are a whole bunch of academics who are offering their support via the Sport Assist hashtag. That if you're interested in taking advantage of that, then obviously look at the hashtag. But last week we had Dr. Robert Casper, who is an Olympics and mega event expert, giving a live Twitter cast about the Tokyo 2020 decision. On Friday evening British time, this Friday, we have Professor Ken Shropshire in Arizona, actually hosting a around the world webinar about COVID-19 and its impact upon sport. Again, you'll find these via the Sport Assist hashtag. If there are any other academics out there, please by all means get involved, volunteer. If you're making resources available free for students, do use the hashtag. But this invitation goes out to anybody working in the industry, because we are a community. Obviously, sport is not just academics. There are lots and lots and lots of other people out there. And if you're doing something interesting, if you want to make something available to students and to the sport community in general, then please do feel free to use the hashtag. Now, the good news is I've got two screens here. So the good news is that on my presentation screen, everything's good. And on my other screen, where I'm supposed to be receiving emails, it seems as though it's working so far. So that's a good thing. If you do see me looking to my right, it is because I've also got my presentation on the on my laptop here as well. So can I just say what this seminar is? For those of you who know anything about me, I have a particular interest in business and sport and the management of sport. But increasingly, what I'm also interested in is the politics of sport. So a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last 5 years in particular, but I would guess even longer than that, possibly 10 years, is when sport, business, and politics come together. And that is informed and is wrapped around by some of the developments in digital and social media. And so the kinds of things that I like to think about, that I teach about in my classes, that I write about, that I talk incessantly and monologue about, are around sport, business, politics, and digital. And so, as I said right from the very start, for me, what's really important about City Football Group is the way in which I think this organization embodies all of those things. So what I'm going to do is to try and, I guess, to a certain extent, deconstruct City Football Group. Obviously, this is only going to be a short webinar, maybe an hour, maybe hour and 15 minutes. And so in that sense, I can only cover a certain amount of ground. I'm not necessarily going to give you answers. And I can imagine there are certain people out there who are going to be looking for specific detail. What I'm interested in is policy and strategy. And so you'll find that my presentation is a reflection of policy and strategy, as opposed to the specifics, for example, of Manchester City's balance sheet or a City Football Group's balance sheet. That's not why I'm doing this. By all means, you can email me at another time. You can start a Twitter conversation using the Sport Assist hashtag, and we can talk about these things. But for the time being, at least, what I'm going to do is talk about policy and strategy. And hopefully you can take something away from this and think maybe in a different way about what's happening with City Football Group. What this seminar isn't, I'm not advocating for City Football Group. So what you're not going to get is me saying, this is fantastic, City Football Group is the greatest organization ever. That's not why I'm here. But at the same time, I'm also not here to say, City Football Group, this is a terrible, terrible organization. This is the devil incarnate. I'm not going to do that. So essentially what I'm going to do is to try and analyze and present a case for what I think City Football Group is, but crucially and much more importantly, to use that as a basis for understanding some of the things that are happening in global sport right now. Now, I do have a tendency to use lots of examples, and what you won't find as we go through this webinar is lots of theories and concepts and calculations and big numbers, and that's not how I present. As I say, the biggest criticism you're going to make of me is I just talk too much. But hey, I'll see you later, and we'll talk about that. Just one final thing, and I suppose this is absolutely 100% vital that I say it, is I'm not a Manchester City fan. Some of you whose names I saw on the attendance list, you know my team, and you know that hurts. But we'll not talk about that now. You can email me or tweet me later and ask me what my team is. So, on that basis, just to get started, some books that you may wish to read. Now, as I've said several times already, I tend to go on a bit. I think if I was sat in one of my webinars or in one of my classes, I would probably leave. But in anticipation that some of you will leave, and also in anticipation that some of you may fall asleep, I thought get the good bit out of the way first. So some books. First one's Dave Conn. Some of you will know David Conn, writes for The Guardian. In 2012, he published a book called Richer Than Gods about Manchester City. As many of you will know, David Conn is one of the most respected writers, certainly in Britain, about football and the business of football. Good book, recommend that you look at it. The second book is by Rory Miller. There are actually two Rory Millers in the world. The other Rory Miller is a kind of football academic. This Rory Miller is a different academic. He works at Georgetown University and has a particular interest in Middle Eastern, specifically Gulf states. And it's at this point I would implore students of this area, and I use the word students not specifically but generally, is when you're trying to conceive of what's happening in world sport and in world football for that matter, is don't just read football books. Do read other things as well. And I think this is a particularly good book by Rory Miller, because what it does is it serves to illustrate what's happening in the Gulf region. And many of you obviously are going to be familiar with the Gulf region. For example, Qatar's ownership of Paris Saint-Germain, the staging of the World Cup, the significance of Saudi Arabian investment in sport. And so to really understand the basis upon which these countries are making such decisions, I think is covered by Rory Miller, but more specifically in terms of City Football Group and Abu Dhabi, this is a really important book to look at. There are other similar versions, but I like this one. The final book, and some of you may already know this name. I'm guessing as many of you who are working in the industry or in the sport will already know Ferran Soriano. Goal, the ball doesn't go in by chance. Interesting book in the sense that this guy was the finance director of FC Barcelona, then became vice president of Barcelona as well, and is now chief executive of the City Football Group. So this, I think, for me, has been a particular source of inspiration. In other words, it's what has led me to put this presentation together today, and in particular, I think Ferran Soriano's vision of what he wants for City Football Group, I think, is embodied within this book. So if you've not seen this book before, I'm sure Ferran won't want me to say this, but I'm sure there must be a free PDF copy on the internet there somewhere. But otherwise, buy it. Although I'm guessing he doesn't necessarily need the money. But it is a good book. It's a good book, and it will add some context and some depth to what we're going to talk about. They're things you have to buy. These are things that are free. Two that I would immediately pick out: Murad Ahmed from Financial Times and Giles Tremlett from The Guardian. You'll see them on the list there. You Google those two; they're available free of charge. They're long reads, and I think they're really helpful in providing some of the detail beyond what I'm going to talk about today. You'll see the use of the term Disneyfication by Murad there. I therefore recommend that you also look at Zenger's piece from Harvard Business Review called "The Disney Recipe." It's a very short piece. It's not long. It's not especially detailed, but I think it's really interesting to look at. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the Harvard Business Review, one of the leading business journals in academia in the world. Very, very strong on practical content, practical detail, articles typically written by business leaders. You may have to register to use the HBR website to be able to get access to this piece. You may, I can't recall, it's been so long since I've done this, but certainly when I looked this morning, it's there. Normally registration is free. I think you get 5 free articles, and obviously this could be one of them. As for the other 2 of the 5 articles on there by this guy Chadwick, I wouldn't believe a word this man says, so I'll leave you to decide whether you read those things. So let's start. In simple terms, Manchester City is a football club, and that's the history of Manchester City. And as I'm sure many of you will know, we go back to late 19th century, and what we saw was the emergence of a sport which we now call football, or if there are any US watchers, you refer to it as soccer. Or if you're George W. Bush, you may recall that he refers to it as soccer ball. So whether you're a football fan, a soccer fan, or a soccer ball fan, then we'll know about late 19th century, and then obviously the development through the 20th century. Now, we could talk about the socio-cultural development, the historical development of football. I do actually think this is really important in terms of what we're now seeing, not just with the Manchester City and the City Football Group, whether you're maybe you're a Lokomotiv Leipzig fan, and following their acquisition by Red Bull, there are similar such issues there. If you're a subscriber to a football club TV channel, hey, 30 years ago you used to go to watch football matches in a stadium. Now you're watching football club TV channels. So, as I said right at the very start, we are talking about Manchester City and City Football Group, but these ideas are equally as applicable to other football clubs as well. And I think what's also equally as applicable as well are the socio-cultural histories of these organizations, especially in the way that they set the context for and really help to clarify some of the issues that are now being raised about the development of these organizations. But as I say, unlike President Castro when he spoke to the United Nations for, I think, 11 hours solid, we don't have 11 hours. So let's swiftly move on, and I'll leave you yourselves to contemplate what the socio-cultural history of these organizations are and what it means for what's happening now. So I'm going to reveal something about my age without actually revealing what my age is. But my first engagement with Manchester City, keeping in mind that I'm not a Manchester City fan, my first engagement with Manchester City that I recall was in 1974. And some of you listening today may remember that 1974 was actually in a different century. And when I found this photograph, I went looking on Google for this photograph, and I was trying to find something suitable, and I looked at the photograph and I thought, oh my God, it's in black and white. And as I was sat preparing for the presentation today, I was thinking, did I actually watch this match on TV in black and white? And I can't remember. But what was really significant about this game is that Manchester City were playing Manchester United in 1974, and I watched it on TV, even though I wasn't a Manchester City fan, because I was just a kid. And I'm not going to tell you how old as a kid I was. I was like 46 in 1974. I'm not going to tell you how old I was as a kid at that point. But this game stuck in my mind. And it stuck in my mind because of one of the guys that you can see in the photograph. So the guy in the far right-hand corner is this. I've not enabled for people to shout out and to give answers, but for all of you out there who like a pub quiz, I'll leave you to guess, like for 5 seconds, who the player on the right-hand side is. But it's actually the player on the left-hand side that I think is particularly significant. So the guy on the right-hand side is, you may recall, some of you out there, it's Mick Summerby. Of course, it's Mick Summerby. The guy on the left is Dennis Law. And Dennis Law had famously previously played for Manchester United. So here was a game in which Dennis Law, previously of United, was playing playing for City against United. And what was really important about this match, and for those of you not seen the footage before, Google it afterwards. So Dennis Law, formerly of Manchester United, backheeled a goal he scored against United, and United were subsequently relegated to what is now the Championship, but back then was the second division. And so this, for me, the drama of this was just incredible. And as you can see there, Law is not celebrating his goal. You know, this was a dramatic moment in presumably his career. But I think in terms of Manchester derbies, it was dramatic. In terms of me as a young boy watching this, this really stuck in my mind, and that's the crucial thing. I've no reason to remember this game really, but it really stuck in my mind. So what did I see that day? Well, I watched on TV. It was hugely entertaining. It was an experience because it was tense and it was dramatic. And I remember my mum and dad being there with me. We did, nobody knew. When you're watching these kinds of games, you don't know what's going to happen until the very last minute. Actually, in that particular case, we did know what was going to happen, because back in the old days, there was no live football, no live league football. So the football match would take place on a Saturday, and then the highlights would be shown on a Sunday. So I watched this on a highlights program on the Sunday. So the uncertainty wasn't quite there. However, if you're watching a live game, we do know it's uncertain and it's dramatic. Pick out the word talent, which I think is really important, because Dennis Law and Mick Summerby, and for those of you who know anything about old Manchester derbies, you have people like Alex Stepney and Colin Bell and these kinds of people. These were talented players, and they were obviously heroes, icons, and celebrities. There was an atmosphere, and that atmosphere was not only being generated in living rooms and in houses of the people who were watching on TV. The atmosphere was also coming from the stadium too. So there was co-production. So long before this social media notion of people being online on social media and co-producing together, we had co-production way back then, because without the crowd in the stadium and the noise and the drama and the excitement, what I saw that day maybe wouldn't have stuck in my mind in the same way. It was also compelling and influential. So this was incredible viewing. You couldn't take your eyes off it, because this was going to be the day that Dennis Law backheeled the goal that sent Manchester United down into the second division. Sorry, Manchester United fans, that I keep saying this. And in terms of influence, it influenced me. As I say, I'm neither a United nor a City fan, and yet I still remember that game, and I still remember how it felt. So at this point, what I would do is I would invite you all, just for a moment or two, is to look at what I've put on there on the screen and think about, what does it remind you of? And whilst you're thinking about what it reminds you of, I'm just going to take a sip of water to clear my throat. So in many ways, and this is the point that I'm trying to make by telling you what I saw that day, is it's like a Hollywood movie, or a Bollywood movie, or any other movie for that matter. And if you think about your favorite film, you think about when you go to the cinema, very often some or all of those qualities or characteristics that I've put up there would describe the film or the movie that you've just seen. And so hopefully what we're now beginning to do gradually is to get into what I think one of the major changes is that we're beginning to see around how some, and I stress the word some, organizations see today, which is essentially football is entertainment. For me, football is still football. Deep down personally, football is football, and it's painful and it hurts and I hate it, and I hate my team, and I really wish they would go away, and I really wish I could stop supporting them. So for me, it's perhaps something a little different to that, but even I find it entertaining. I find it entertaining to watch people kick a ball, and in the same way, we can understand how there is this overlap to entertainment, to Hollywood, and to forms of entertainment. But I want to dissect this a little bit more. And I don't want to provide a chronology of Manchester City history or a chronology of Manchester City ownership. For those of you out there who want to, want me to flex my intellectual muscles or my powers of memory, yeah, I remember Peter Swales and I remember Francis Lee. So I do know what Manchester City has been and what Manchester City has been about. We can talk about Thaksin Shinawatra, in the 2000s and what that all meant for Manchester City. But I guess crucially, from my perspective, in terms of what we're doing today, it's from 2008 onwards that we begin to see the seeds being sown of not only what City Football Group is today, but also what other organisations in sport are becoming today or have become today. So there's obviously the Abu Dhabi investment into City and the City Football Group. Abu Dhabi is really, really important to this. And again, I don't want to at this point get involved in a fractious debate about what Abu Dhabi is or isn't. Again, we can pursue that kind of debate elsewhere on social media or via email or if ever we meet. But I think Abu Dhabi and the country of Abu Dhabi is really important to the points that I'm going to be making. Second was the stake that China Media Capital took in the City Football Group in 2015. Some of you may recall the very, very famous selfie with David Cameron, China's President Xi, and Sergio Aguero. For me, that was really hugely. It was in my world, that was probably one of the most influential selfies in the history of what I'm interested in, because it was two politicians, but it wasn't just a British politician, it was also a politician from the Far East, but also a player as well, a footballer. And so I think it's especially interesting to think about the semiotics of that Instagram post, of that selfie. But that's another thing for another day. Please excuse me, I just need to log back into my other screen. Then in 2019, some of you will probably recall, many of you will recall that late last year, Silver Lake, a US private equity investor, took a stake in in City Football Group. Sorry, I'm using the terms interchangeably. I shouldn't, in City Football Group. I thought that was absolutely crucial. Because what you've got is effectively a red thread running from Beijing with China Media Capital through the Middle East, Abu Dhabi, through Manchester, and out towards California, tech capital, entertainment capital, home of Hollywood, and that red thread for me is vital. It's vital in understanding the dynamics and changes of elite professional sports that we have seen over the last decade. We'll come back to some of this later, but in terms of the details, we'll leave it at that point. So again, I'm not going to go into a huge amount I will go into detail in the end. I'm not going to keep on saying I'm not going to go into detail. We'll go into some detail in just a moment, but I just wanted to provide you with an overview of effectively where we're at, particularly with Manchester City, but I think with City Football Group more generally. And when it comes to vision and strategy, I would say read the book that I recommended that you look at right at the very start, which is Ferran Soriano's book, Goal. Because what you will see in this book is almost like an individual offering a manifesto for how he thinks a football club should develop, and the business model on which it should be developed, what its revenue streams should be, what the strategy of this club should be moving forwards. And so in terms of what Soriano said in the book, in terms of what we are now seeing at City Football Group, and I think as we move forwards, and already some of you will know that City Football Group is establishing a franchise in China. They're establishing a franchise in India. We already know about some of the developments that they're engaged in, like the Citizens Web platform. We're beginning to see the vision that Soriano had quite a long time ago beginning to play through. Now, many of you out there will know that back in 2006, Ferran Soriano came to speak to my students when I was working at the University of London. And he gave a presentation that day in which he outlined his vision for football, or for a football club at that point, Barcelona, of Barcelona, and obviously now Manchester City and the other clubs within the City Football Group, becoming like the Disney Corporation. And so increasingly frequently what we've seen people referring to is the Disneyfication of City Football Group, the Disneyfication of football, the Disneyfication of sport. We're going to talk about the Disneyfication of City Football Group and football in a moment. But essentially, that's the vision. That's the Disneyfication, certainly in commercial terms, of football clubs, of sports organizations, of sports events, and so forth. Now, hold that notion of Disneyfication just for the moment, because we're going to come onto it in the next slide. But what we are beginning to see in terms of strategy and resources, because obviously if you have this vision of becoming a global entertainment business, which is, I think, what City Football Group are trying to do. They're trying to become a global entertainment business. Then in terms of resources on field, you need those stars and icons and heroes and celebrities that we talked about previously. And so on field, you need those players. You need Aguero, you need De Bruyne, you need the star centre forwards, the star midfielders. In Manchester City's case, I'm not sure we talk about star defenders, but that's another matter. Let's not get into that. So you need those people, and of course, alongside the playing squad, you have arguably the biggest movie star in football as the manager of Manchester City, the coach in Pep Guardiola, and so. Recalling Ferran Soriano's book, "The ball doesn't go in the goal by chance." Pep Guardiola is not the coach by chance. This is part of a strategy. It's part of the strategic acquisition of resources. If and when Guardiola signs a new contract to stay at Manchester City, that will be part of the strategic retention of key assets, of key resources. And so this is not by chance. This is all strategic, and it's linked to the vision. What I would say off the field, and for those of you who know very little about City Football Group off the field, can I invite you, after this is your homework for tonight, essay 1,500 words by this time next week, is take a look at the composition of the board of directors, and take a look at the composition of the management team at City Football Group. So the acquisition of resources. We would most think about De Bruyne and Guardiola, or Raheem Sterling. The acquisition of human resources off the field is just as important. And what I find particularly interesting about the senior management team at Manchester City is who those people are. And really two things that stand out. Number one, a lot of them came from Barcelona. So this is the recreation of Barcelona in Manchester. That's really interesting in itself. But I think beyond that, from an academic standpoint, many of these people are incredibly well-educated people who've been to some of the best business schools in the world, educated to MBA level, sometimes more than that. And for me, that in itself is a really interesting thing, because this is in stark contrast to the kinds of people that you would typically find running football clubs, certainly 20 years ago, but possibly even 10 years ago. And so in terms of vision, strategy, resources, I think understanding that constellation of resources and assets is an important part of understanding why City Football Group does what it does and how it is doing it. And this is equally as applicable to City Football Group, Paris Saint-Germain, Red Bull Leipzig, And for that matter, the likes of Manchester United and Juventus and Real Madrid and others, we're in the midst of a really major cultural shift in the way that football clubs are organised, are managed, and are run. But let's go and move on to the Disneyfication of City Football Group, and I'm not going to get all intellectual and heavy about this. If you want to get intellectual and heavy about this, I'll see you afterwards, and we can roll up our sleeves and have an academic tussle. But I think just to talk very kind of generally about what it means for an organisation to be Disneyfied. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the term, this is now becoming a common term in business, and there are lots of people out there in the world, not just academics, but journalists as well and others, who are writing about the Disneyfication of society. And some of you may also be familiar with the literature on the McDonaldization of society. And again, some really interesting work out there on McDonald's and its influence on other sectors. But given that Soriano talks specifically about the Disneyfication of football, I thought it would be helpful to give you the 4 key characteristics of what many people believe constitutes Disneyfication. And so if you take the first kind of core concept of theming, which is infusing a place or an object with a particular idea. And if you think about Walt Disney infusing a place or object with a particular idea, you go to a Disney store, for instance, or you go to Disneyland, or you watch a Disney movie, and certainly when I was a kid and I watched Disney movies, it was all about kind of innocence and joy and dare I say cuteness. I don't know whether I've ever said cuteness in one of my classes before, but cuteness. And there's always that point in a Disney movie where there's a dark, sinister side, but the heroes always win through. And so, this notion of theming, I think, is central to Disney. And the notion of theming, I think, with City Football Group is also there. And I know that this is not a characteristic across the whole group, but the most immediate example for me of theming, and particularly if you think about Manchester City and New York City, is the sky blue shirt. That's one example of theming. The second characteristic is hybrid consumption, a collection of multiple consumption opportunities in a particular location. So for the last 4 years, up until recently, I was working in Manchester for the last 4 years. I would very often go up to the Etihad Stadium, sometimes just to hurl abuse at City fans, but other times to actually go and look and watch and see what was happening. And what is really interesting about Etihad is it's a football stadium, but at the same time, they have a really well-developed retail outlet there. There are places that you can go and eat and drink. But there's one part of the experience when you go up to Etihad is Manchester historically has been synonymous with music and the music scene. And so what you will always find when you go to a City game at the Etihad is there's always live music outside. There's a music stage. And what the CFG people are trying to do is to showcase local Manchester bands. And so when you take the tram up there to the Etihad and there's a big concourse there, it's not just a case of walking from the tram to the stadium. There's entertainment, there's places to eat and drink, there are places to buy things, there are places to meet your friends. And so it very much is, in a kind of Disneyfied sense, an example of hybrid consumption. And inevitably that brings in this whole area of merchandising. And if you think about Disney stores, Disney stores are a prime example of how an entertainment business, which essentially its core business is movies, is then using its core business of movies and entertainment to sell merchandise. And that's very much the case. And many of you will be saying, hey, yeah, I know, but my club do that too. My club's got a great store. My club's got lots of merchandise. And I think that's the point. Because when I go back to 1974 and I was watching Manchester City and other football teams, the merchandising just wasn't there. It simply wasn't there. You may be able to buy a match day program and possibly a scarf, and then boom, that's pretty much it. So the fact that you're all familiar with merchandising outlets and buying scarves and trousers and quilt covers and pillows and pens and whatever else, this is very much part of what I think Soriano and some people would characterize as being Disneyfication. You've also got this fourth characteristic of what is called performative labor. So in other words, performers. And football players are performers. They perform. And even people in football, they very often use this word perform. This player performed today, or this player didn't perform today. So this kind of comparison with or this connection to entertainment and movie making, they are performers. And for those of you who watch the Amazon documentary series All or Nothing, what you have there is performative labor. So these are football players who are providing a service. They're playing football, but in All or Nothing, they also became entertainers as well. And so in terms of Disneyfication, the Amazon documentary didn't come by chance. So I'm going to keep saying this probably quite a few times. That didn't happen by chance. That was a deliberate means through which CFG could frame their players not just as good strikers, good centre forwards, good midfielders, good goalkeepers. This was a way of framing the players as performative labour. They're also entertainers. So that's one part of CFG. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of consider CFG in parts. I'm not going to mix it all together until the end when I try to make a kind of set of concluding observations. But for those of you who are thinking, this is terrible, I'm going now, this guy's boring, okay, bye. Sorry, I tried. For those of you who are thinking, this is interesting, I want more, then I'll leave you to think about it. And as I said, we can talk about it afterwards through various means. The other part of City Football Group is this, and this is explicit reference to Abu Dhabi. And you recall that right at the very start, I talked about Abu Dhabi, and I deliberately highlighted it for you. And I'm not talking about Abu Dhabi as a place you can go on a holiday and take a beach trip, and I'm not talking about Abu Dhabi as a deeply suspect nation that is engaged in practices that some people really abhor. And what I'm talking about is Abu Dhabi as a country. And I'm particularly interested in country strategy. So for those of you who know me, you'll know this already. One of the things that really interests me, possibly more than football actually, is countries. And I have a particular interest in country strategy. And for those of you who are new to this term, Abu Dhabi is a rentier state. Qatar is a rentier state. Bahrain is a rentier state. We could talk about other rentier states across the world, but I think for the time being, particularly because rentier states are very often synonymous with the Gulf, it's important that we just restrict it to the Gulf region now, and particularly to Abu Dhabi. So for those of you who've never been to the Middle East, you've never been to the Gulf region, it's different. It's different. These are not liberal Western democracies that some of us may be familiar with. I would even say that if you're from China, if you're from other parts of Asia, rentier states are different to places like China, in the sense that what you have is essentially a ruling elite. And that ruling elite is in the main entrusted by its populations to make decisions on behalf of them, and really in simple terms, to do the right thing. And the consequence of this, and one of the ways in which social stability is maintained, and I think that's a really important phrase to use, one of the ways in which social stability is maintained is that countries like Abu Dhabi don't have tax systems. If you think about that, they don't have tax systems. You don't pay tax. So if you go to work there, you don't pay tax. But then, of course, this raises serious issues in terms of, well, if you are spending on you're spending on infrastructure, you're spending on hospitals, you're spending on education, you're spending on the armed forces. Where does the money come from to pay for these things? Now, some of you will say, oh, of course, oil and gas. It comes from oil and gas, and I guess to a certain extent that is true. These are oil and gas rich nations. But what rentier states will also do is they will look offshore for investment opportunities that generate, as you can see here, a private income. And that private income accrues to members of the ruling family who the populations of these countries then trust to use that money for the purposes of maintaining social stability and keeping people happy in countries like Abu Dhabi. Now, this raises all kinds of issues, and I'm not an international relations guy. I'm not a politics professor. I'm not into. I'm not a sociocultural historian of the Middle East. What I am is I'm interested in how this impacts upon football and sport more generally. So I think there's something really really interesting here about how Abu Dhabi, through City Football Group, is using football and entertainment as a means through which to invest in assets offshore that generate revenue streams that make a contribution to the maintenance of social stability in countries overseas. But I think there's something more than that, because if you look at arguably the three most significant rentier states in the Gulf, so Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Dubai, they're very small. Small in terms of geographical area, but also small in terms of population. They're very, very vulnerable. And by vulnerable, they've got one of the regions, one of the two regions, the regions, two major power blocks either side of them. On one side, they've got Saudi Arabia. On the other side, they've got Iran. They're also in a region where there has been significant political and security instability. So I think one of the other things too about ruling families, for example, from Abu Dhabi, investing in overseas assets is not just about generating an income stream, but it's also about risk mitigation, because the general threats to such countries means that they're going to move some of their assets overseas to other territories, so that the assets are protected and they're not exposed to the vulnerabilities of the Gulf region. So I'm not saying that this is the only reason that Abu Dhabi is invested at City Football Group. It's not the only reason, but the reality is that it's one of the reasons. Just as PSG is just as Qatar is at PSG, and we see other forms of this in terms of, for example, Bahrain and its investment into the McLaren F1 team. Sorry, just let me log into my other machine again. And to take a drink. So hopefully by now what you're beginning to see is that City Football Group is an amalgam. It's an amalgam of football and entertainment and business and politics. And I think there's a further element of politics that we're going to talk about in just a second. And then we'll say a little bit more about digital. Then there's a couple more slides, and we'll be heading towards the end. But hopefully by now, in talking about football and business and Disneyfication and politics, you can begin to see how your club or clubs with which you're familiar, or for that matter, other organizations in sport with which you're familiar, demonstrate some of the characteristics that I'm now talking about. Now, clearly, not every football club is owned by a Gulf investor. That's obvious. But nevertheless, there are clubs owned by Gulf investors. There are clubs owned by other states that might be seeking to do the same things as we've just talked about here with Abu Dhabi. There may also be clubs out there where I'm sure that the owner or the chairperson or the chief executive or the director of marketing or the first team manager, they don't talk about Disneyfication, but implicitly within what they're doing and what's happening to those organizations, they are going through a process that some of us would describe as Disneyfication. So CFG is an amalgam, but again, I would invite some of you to think about the extent to which your club or clubs with which you're familiar demonstrate similar characteristics. So the next part of the amalgam is soft power. And we've in a couple of 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks time, I'm going to give a webinar on soft power in sport. I could talk for hours and days and weeks and months, probably years, if you know me. As I say, if you sat in my classes before, you know I could speak for years, but I'm not going to. So come back for the webinar in a few weeks' time on soft power. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with this term, we distinguish soft power from hard power. Hard power is force. It's about sending the troops in. It's about shooting at people. It's about blowing things up. It's about threats. That's hard power. Soft power, as the name implies, is something much softer and gentler and more persuasive. And at the heart of soft power as a concept is this notion of being attractive to the world. And I would personally link the notion of soft power to nation branding. And nation branding really is what's your nation's brand? No matter where you are today, whether you're in China or India or the United States or Britain or France, or what's your nation's brand? We'll talk about nation branding perhaps when we do the soft power seminar in a few weeks' time. But what I think Abu Dhabi is doing, using City Football Group and entertainment and football, is it's trying to create and project soft power. And as I say, that's linked to nation branding, so that we get to know the nation for something in particular. So soft power is sometimes called attractive power. It's about getting people to be attracted to a country. It's about getting us to think good things, to think nice things. And I'm generalizing a lot here because the concept is actually quite complex and sophisticated, but it's about getting people to like you. And if you link that to nation branding, it's also about getting people to know who you are and what you stand for. Some of you at this point are probably thinking sport washing, sport washing, sport washing. I don't currently have a webinar planned to look at sport washing, but if there's anybody out there in the world, if there's a critical mass of people who's saying, hey, do a webinar on sport washing, yeah, okay, we'll try and do a webinar on sport washing later. No plans to do that at the moment, but maybe we'll do it later. But soft power and nation branding, it's effectively about getting people to like you, to know who you are, and to see that you want the same things as they do. But I think there's also something too about possibly distracting attention. So you look at the good bits associated with a country and not the bad bits. There's something too as well about actually being known for something, your country being known for something. And if we think about US straight away, we think about Hollywood. If we think about Britain, immediately we're thinking about the royal family. If we're thinking about Brazil, straight away we're thinking about the Maracanã. And so countries have brands and countries become known for things. And yet, if you were to go back 10 years ago and say Abu Dhabi, I'm guessing most people in the world would say, what, where, what's that? And yet what we've now seen is people commonly will talk about Abu Dhabi, and many of us out there will associate Abu Dhabi with Manchester City, with City Football Group. Many of us out there would also associate Abu Dhabi with Etihad Airlines. And we've not even talked about Etihad Airlines yet, and we'll introduce this into the equation in just a moment. But I think Etihad Airlines is all part of this picture. And again, it's not by chance. It's not by chance that Etihad Airlines are obviously the stadium sponsor, the shirt sponsor of Manchester City. And I know that raises a whole bunch of issues around financial fair play and evaluation of sponsorships, etc., etc. That's another webinar for another day. We could do these webinars every day for a year, or every week for a year, and still not finish. But Etihad is a really important part of this story. So we've got the football, the entertainment, the business, the Disneyfication, the politics, the diplomacy, which is really what soft power is about, and we've also got digital and a re-emphasis of entertainment. And I guess what I would do is just at this point to re-emphasize the Disney, what I would call the Disney trajectory, and the investment of CMC and Silver Lake into the club is really significant, because not only did it inject funds into the business, and some of you, many of you will know now, at the moment as things stand, City Football Group is the highest valued group of football clubs in the world. Many people will say, "Hey, Manchester City is the most financially valuable club in the world." And it's not Manchester City; it's City Football Group that refers to. But I think CMC and Silver Lake investing into City Football Group is a reflection of what is happening to football and entertainment and digital developments. But it's also an endorsement of the strategy, I think, that City Football Group is pursuing, because for those of you who are familiar with CMC and Silver Lake, these are not nothing organizations. So if we take Silver Lake, for instance, Silver Lake is invested into Twitter, it's invested into UFC, and at that point we take a quick digression. I'm not a wrestling fan, but I do obviously know what UFC is. Wrestling fighting, not wrestling fighting. If you think about what UFC is, and you think about the comparisons with the staging of movie productions or theatrical productions, UFC is not just a couple of guys beating the hell out of each other. There's something far more sophisticated going on there, and Silver Lake is invested into that, but obviously it's also invested into City Football Group. But what I particularly find interesting about Silver Lake as well is its investment into two digital phenomena in China, which is Alibaba and Didi. I'm guessing that many people will know Alibaba already. Didi is Chinese Uber, and if you think about what Uber is, and you're then getting into Uber and Uber Eats and all those other things, Silver Lake is invested into Alibaba and Didi. And so, if we're talking about red threads, going back to my red thread between Beijing and California, what you have there is a confluence and intersection of entertainment and digital, and organizations that see this convergence of sport and entertainment and digital technology as being crucial in driving their respective businesses forward. So how does it all come together? Now, I have to confess that when I give classes, it's sometimes hard to think of examples to illustrate points, and so I think I've done pretty well. I've done pretty well in the slide that I've given you there. But some of you might be thinking, who's Jack Harrison? But I just thought Jack Harrison was a great illustration of some of the things that I've been trying to talk about. For those of you who don't know, Jack Harrison is an English player, a young English player who was playing for New York City, and he was brought back to the UK by Manchester City. He went on loan initially to Middlesbrough. For those of you who know me, yeah, I know Middlesbrough. Let's not talk about that. So he first went to Middlesbrough, and he's now on loan at Leeds United. And what I thought Jack Harrison was an illustration of, certainly in footballing terms, is that the whole franchise network that City Football Group now seems to be operating is premised on the basis of acquiring and managing talent. And again, we could talk for a week about that model and how that works. Not just the franchise model, but acquiring and managing talent. But I think Jack Harrison is a great example. You know, this is a business, an entertainment business, that is reliant upon unearthing, acquiring, developing, retaining, and possibly even disposing of, and that's a harsh word, I know, but that's the reality, disposing of talent in whatever way. And so the franchise network that we'll allude to again in just a second, you know, that partly is driven by this need for the importance of talent. So it's about talent, and it's about using that talent as an input into this platform, which is football. So football's the platform. So talent helps to drive the business. The core business, if you like, is football. That's the platform. That's the basis upon which all of this is being based. And we could talk about Manchester City or New York City or Girona or Yokohama or Melbourne. Some of the others we can mention in just a moment. But then we're getting into the core business is the football. That is the platform. But then we're back into Disneyfication territory, because we're talking about serials like All or Nothing. I still find it incredible to think about. You can make a TV series about a football club, and these people who are players first and foremost suddenly become, they become celebrities, they become entertainers, and the number of people I've spoken to who will talk about how empathetic they felt with certain players when something went wrong as a result of All or Nothing, or how one player would tell a story about themselves, and suddenly people who weren't even City fans would say, yeah, he's a really nice guy, and his background's pretty similar to my background. And so these, almost like these kind of Disney or movie-like qualities that we associate with this form of entertainment, I think we saw through All or Nothing. We've got the development of digital and citizens, and if you don't know citizens, that's the next part of your homework for tonight, is to Google it and check it out and see what it looks like. So here is an organization, and it's not the only organization. We can think of Bayern Munich, we can think about Real Madrid, we can think about Barcelona, and many other soccer ball clubs that are in the business of also establishing and developing their digital footprint. But I just think in the context of this example, obviously citizens is really important. but the next one, franchising, is really interesting. And at this point, can I just say to you, I've got a dry throat. It's nothing more. That's why I'm coughing. So I'm going to drink again. So franchising, if you think about Disneyfication, franchising is an important part of Disneyfication. And if we had to think about Toy Story, and some of my former students, we've talked about this before. You think about the Toy Story franchise, and when we all remember Buzz Lightyear and the films, and yet the Toy Story franchise rolled out, and the Toy Story franchise became Toy Story 1, Toy Story 1, Toy Story 2, Toy Story 3. We've seen it with Cars, Cars 1, Cars 2. We see it with Monsters and Disney. And so, again, you can see where CFG is starting to become a very, very important node in a business network that isn't just about football. It is, for instance, about franchising. So that franchising, yes, it's about entertainment. And yes, it draws inspiration from Disney. And yes, it is about entering new territories, and it's about building business, and it's about engaging fans. It's also about, and this is one of the interesting things about the franchising model, talent acquisition. Because by having a permanent market presence in remote territories, essentially what you're able to do, you're able to scout for players, you're able to scout for coaches, and so the franchising model is a very, very interesting one, which I think has multiple benefits for this organization. But franchising too is also, or the benefits of franchising too, are manifest also in terms of, for instance, networks. And what CFG and others, so again, keep in mind, I'm just illustrating using CFG. There are other organizations in 21st century sport that are doing this as well, is to use a networked form of organization, network strategy, to capitalize upon the economic, the industrial, the commercial, the political and diplomatic opportunities that operating across territories throughout the world globally provides them with. So I'll take you back to last February. It was announced that Manchester City Football Group, I'm still doing it, City Football Group would be setting up a franchise in China. Now, keep in mind that you can't do anything in China without the state agreeing to it. And so immediately what you have is an organization owned by the state, a state from the Middle East, effectively engaging in a relationship with an organization that is likely to have very close links to the state in China. So it's a state-to-state relationship with football and entertainment in the middle, but other interests as well. And what was significant about the City Football Group franchise announcement in China last February was the day before that, and not many people noticed this, is Etihad Airlines announced that they would be developing their services on a strategic basis. So putting new planes, better planes, more flights from more destinations into, surprise, surprise, Chengdu Airport. And so what you'll also find is that not just football, but sport in other contexts as well, is very often being used as a political instrument. And so earlier when I talked about soft power and I talked about rentier states, there's also something about political networks in all of this as well. And I think the way in which Etihad Airways and the government of Abu Dhabi in general has used this football and entertainment asset to engage in building political relationships, diplomatic relationships, is important. The final one that I would like to highlight for you is this whole notion of generating rents from overseas. I started working in Manchester in 2015, and I stopped working in Manchester about 5 weeks ago. And in that four-year period that I was working there, the skyline of Manchester changed dramatically. And what you now see, if you come to Manchester, what you'll now see is lots and lots of, really quite swanky, expensive, glitzy, glossy blocks being built, many of which are residential, some of which are commercial, a lot of which are being funded by Abu Dhabi. And so what Abu Dhabi has done through CFG is to build relationships with, for example, Manchester City Council as a way of engaging in the local property market. And let's say, for example, Abu Dhabi comes under attack. Abu Dhabi comes under attack from Iran, or there is an issue with Saudi Arabia, or let's say something really truly terrible happens. There is a terrorist grouping infiltrates Abu Dhabi. What we now have is we have assets offshore that are generating an income. They're generating rents. I think it is part of the logic that Abu Dhabi is a rentier state. Some of the rents that are being generated now from property in Manchester will be being used for the purposes of Abu Dhabi citizens not paying tax. That's the reality, and I think that is also why this notion of CFG and how it is being used by its owners is really important. Now you'll notice that I've refrained, and this is the last slide. So even though I can't hear any of you, I can hear a collective cheer, thinking, "Thank God he's finished." If you are doing that, I'm going to come and find you. I'm going to chase you down. You'll notice that I've tried to be as balanced as possible. Obviously, there are some value judgments in there about my analysis, my assessment of what's happening. I don't think that it is necessarily complete. There are other things that we could have talked about. I don't, clearly the technical detail that some of you may have expected isn't necessarily there. But that's as an academic, that's not what I do. I'm not a technical detail academic. What I am is I'm interested in grand visions and big plans, and how countries and sport make those grand visions and big plans work. So if there's anybody who's interested in a technical detail who wants to talk about this, then hey, that'd be a great conversation to have about how we marry or align those two things. The other thing as well, obviously I've talked a lot about City Football Group, and I keep talking about Manchester City, and I've mentioned New York City and Yokohama a couple of times. This is a great organization to look at. It's a great organization to analyze. But if you look at the first 4 points there in terms of conclusions, if you are a fan of Juventus, if you are a fan of Paris Saint-Germain, if you are a fan of Barcelona, if you're a fan of Bayern Munich, if you're a Chicago Bulls or a New York Knicks follower, if you're an F1 fan and you're a big fan of the Ferrari F1 team, hopefully in terms of what those teams are doing, in the first 4 points on the slide that you've got there, you will see something of what your favorite teams are doing embodied within those first 4 points. I don't think necessarily that all of these examples exhibit all of these characteristics or traits, but certainly City Football Group does, and I think there are other examples out there in the world that do as well. And hence, I make the 5th point: similar models are evident elsewhere. Hopefully what you can see there from the analysis, that it's a very personal analysis. It's what I think is happening. It's an intersection of football, entertainment, digital, and politics. What I would like to do, I wish I had more time to do it, is to think a little more about what some of the leadership and management problems are. I guess I would invite you to think about if you work for Disney, or for that matter, you're working for Starbucks, or you were working for McDonald's, or you were working for Costa Coffee, and you were franchising out across the world. What would be some of the leadership and management problems associated with your job? So, there's an interesting debate to be had about, going back to Fran Soriano and his team of well-qualified senior managers. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the issues they face in leading and managing these businesses? And I guess particularly in the context of what we're facing now in terms of COVID-19, how do you manage City Football Group? How do you manage a franchise model? How do you manage a globalized sport business when faced with this huge crisis? But I think even under normal circumstances, there are really interesting leadership and management issues for people like us to consider. The other thing that I would say, and I said right at the very start, and that it wasn't going to be either, I'm not advocating for City Football Group, nor am I going to condemn City Football Group. But I think I do need to, kind of give a nod to some of the criticisms, and we've mentioned one in particular, which is sport washing. There's obviously an impending court for arbitration in sport case involving City Football Group, specifically Manchester City, and alleged, can I say proven, or do I need to say alleged? One of the two, I'm not sure. Financial fair play infringements. Don't sue me. I'm not. I'm neutral in this. So there are not. This is an organisation, and this is a way of doing business that is not without criticism. I'm sure again, and the debate can be had using #SportAssist. It's something that needs to be talked about because this is important for our industry. It's important for our community. It's important for the practice of leadership and management. I think it's important for fans and fandom and the future of sport and future of football. And so I'm not going to delve too much further into criticism, but it is there. Some people are vehemently critical. Some are not. Some are hugely supportive. As I say, that's another debate to be had at another time on another day. And so on that basis, I would say thank you for listening. wherever you are and however you've been listening. If you've fallen asleep, time to wake up. If you've gone already, sorry, I can't help being boring. If you liked that and enjoyed it, great, thank you. Feel free to engage. We got a Q&A next week. We've got a few more webinars coming up, and you'll find me tweeting about these on my Twitter timeline. You've got my Twitter handle there. You've also got my email address. Don't send me abusive emails, please, because I'll just delete them. But as usual, for people who know me, and I know that quite a few of you do know me, you're welcome to get in touch. I'm on LinkedIn. You can email me. You can make comments on my Twitter timeline. And I promise not to monologue too much if you engage me on Twitter or on LinkedIn or via email. This wasn't intended to be a seminar or a webinar in which I deliberately or gratuitously market things, but the EMLYON program team said, Simon, you need to gratuitously and blatantly and openly engage in kind of indirect selling. They want me to tell you what a great set of master's programs they have, and they're the people that you need to contact if you are interested. We've got a really great master's in sport, but I'll say no more than that. Finally, just to say, if you liked it, good. I'm happy that you did. Hopefully you'll come back for some more. To reiterate what was said at the very beginning, this has been recorded. We will be posting it on our website, as we will all of the others. And so you will be able to listen again at some stage in the future. And at that point, it is, I'm looking at one. So one of my machines has got French time. One of my machines has got English time. So I think it's 5:20 British time and 6:20 French time. So I think that's enough after an hour and 20 minutes. So thank you. And I look forward to being with some of you again soon. Thanks.